Hey, how you guys doing? So here's another learning video, free tutorial, free art lesson about saturation when it comes to how saturation should color be in anything. Well, right now we're going to talk about skin tone with natural light, and then we'll also talk about unnatural lighting. But what is more saturated, the highlights or the shadows, or the midtones, and what should be and why? And this is something that I find that a lot of books and art teachers fail to explain is the why of these things. They'll just say, well, yeah, that's the way it is, but then you're like, well, why is it that way? I'm going to go into a little bit really basic physics, so bear with me. All right, so let's take our color picker to see that this is true. Now, in this particular picture, we can see there's a lot of natural lighting, and because of that, you don't get really dark shadows. And even if you take the darkest shadows down here, notice on the color picker in the lower left-hand corner that everything is very desaturated. Even trying to go to the parts that look like they're the most saturated here and the shadows, it's not very saturated. You get maybe to the middle of it. Then you notice the midtones are even less saturated than that, and then you have the less saturation where the highlight is. Now, why is this? Now, first off, let's look at the definition of saturation and when it comes to color. It's basically the where there's the most color. That is, if you like, white would be totally not saturated. A matter of fact, let's go ahead and just type this into get the exact definition here for you guys in the dictionary. So saturated, when it applies to color, is of color, very bright, full, and free from an admixture of white. So this means that the more color, so on this thing, this little color wheel down here, this right here would be the least saturated because it's pure white. And then also pure black would be the least saturated. Anything that's on this grayscale is totally desaturated, where it's pure black, pure black, pure white, or something in between. And then as you move over toward the pure color, which is in the top right-hand corner, that's going to be the most saturation. And as you move down, it's still saturated, but we're getting less saturated as we go down toward the pure black, because remember, pure black is desaturated. Now, in nature, no shadow is going to be pure black. It's always going to have some color to it, no matter how dark it might look, unless it's somehow the camera just didn't see the color coming to it, in which case then it might be pure black. But typically there's not going to be pure black shadows, and I'll show some examples of really dark shadows that still have saturation in them. Okay, so why is this all this way then? So let's go into it. So I'm going to show some examples and we'll go into why. You can see here, very desaturated, where the light's hitting. Even down here on this really bright highlight, very desaturated because it's white. Down in here, desaturated. On her foot, desaturated. So anything that looks like it's tending to be more lighter in color, that is more white in color, by definition is going to be less saturated. So if you think of like pure white as saturation, then that's incorrect. But then you would, if you do think of it that way, then that would be like pure saturation, I guess. But in this case, it's not. White is the absence of color. Now in physics, white is all colors put together, right? So how this works then with natural lighting, when all light puts together hits the body, where it reflects, where all that pure light reflects back to us the most, then we see mostly pure white. That is, we're seeing mostly pure color. Therefore, we're seeing mostly pure white, which is considered not color, since all the colors mixed together make no color on the color wheel, that is white, then we see that as desaturated. And that's how we choose to define it. So that would be desaturated. That's why it's desaturated, because it's reflecting the most color back at you. It's not absorbing much color, and it's reflecting most of that pure color back at you, which is white. Now, when you get to midtones, like let's say here, you can see the midtones are a little bit more saturated, but they're not as saturated as the shadows. So even though these shadows aren't very saturated, because they're not very dark, and I'll go into that in a second, they are more saturated. You see as they're going more toward the middle here, they are more saturated than these midtones. So here's some midtones here, and as we go down here, here's a really dark shadow actually. And even that dark shadow, you notice it is getting more saturated, but it's not as, as saturated as people might teach to draw shadows. So in this case, the reason why this is because the shadows, this is a very blown out picture. There's a lot of photons coming back at us. And so the midtones, they have some color coming back at us, but because they're on the brighter side, they still have a lot of natural light also bouncing back at us. And because that natural light is bouncing back at us, we see less of saturation. That is, there's more pure light coming at us than there is color, and therefore we see more desaturation. That is, we see more pure white, which is desaturation, than we do see actual color, which is saturation. And that's why midtones are, usually though, midtones are right around the mid section. I'm going to go through more photos and show you that. And then finally, where the shadows are, the reason why the shadows get more saturated than the midtones, which seems like a contradiction, but it's true, and I'll show you here if we look at some other photos here. If you look at these shadows area, look how saturated that is. And this photo I think has been doctored up to be more saturated anyway. But as you get into this pure black, you'll note that it's on the saturation side. See, it's on the right hand side. I mean, that's a very saturated dark color, and it's not pure black. It's not down there. If I take that color and paint it though, I'll go ahead and just paint this color on here. You see, it's not pure black. Next to pure black, you can actually see the difference. If I zoom in on that, you can see this one looks a little more reddish, like a reddish brown. And that's usually as dark as shadows as you're going to get inside of a photo. It's very rare. Like, look, let's try to get pure black here. That right there almost looks pure black, and that could be because they bumped up the saturation and changed and modified the photo afterwards. And that right there is pretty close to pure black. Now, the turning point here where the shadow turns, let's go and zoom in on this. You can see how red that looks. That's usually the warmest and saturated part of any figure, or not just figure, of anything, of any object, where the shadow is turning toward the midtone. This right here is all midtone. This is another shadow right here. But where it's turning, that's where you get a very saturated part. And then you have here midtones, and this one is all pretty saturated, even the midtones. But notice as we come over here toward where everything looks white and get lighter in color, it's much less. Look at it, it's on the desaturated side. It's not even the center. And as we move toward here, it'll get more saturated until finally we get this very saturated area right in here, and then the shadow is pretty saturated. Okay, so the reason why shadows, and we'll look at another photo here too, but anyway, the reason why shadows appear to be, and look at this shadow here, it's very dark, but it's more toward the saturated side. Notice how much toward the saturated side it is? Even though it's almost black, it still has some color in it. Now, how this happens in physics is, so when we see something that appears to be dark in color, that's the absence of pure light. So as light is being absorbed by the object, most all the color is being absorbed by the object. That is most all the pure light. But some non-pure light, that is an actual color, is reflected back at us. And typically shadows, like dark shadows, notice how lighter shadows like this shadow here isn't as saturated. Notice it's almost in the center, not quite, but and you have something like this shadow here, a little more saturated, and as you get darker, some of these shadows are getting even more saturated. And as you get up here, look how saturated some of these shadows are in here, really toward that saturated side. Down here in the leg area, very saturated. In the knee area, you get more saturated. And as it turns over that turning point, you get a good saturation area as well. Okay, and let's go look on the arm. Right here is what I'm talking about. So here you have really desaturated. This is actually reflected light, and so I'll talk about that in a second. But as you move over to the shadow, which is pretty saturated, into this desaturated area, which is like almost looks like a very peachy white color, a very light color. Very, basically anything that looks toward white, like light color, is going to be desaturated because of the white in it. And right here, you're going to have that turning point. You have a good saturated part. You can see here midtones on this person are pretty much right in the middle between the desaturated and saturation. And as you go right here, that's a midtone right there. That midtone is right there in the middle. And as you move toward the light, it gets less and less saturated. So it gets more desaturated, yeah, less saturated. And as you go towards the shadow, you can also see that we get more saturated. Okay, so again, why that is because the shadow is absorbing all the wavelengths of light, all the pure color of light, which remember, all light together in physics equals white. That doesn't work with pigments. Obviously, mix all your paint colors together, you're not going to get white. You're going to get something closer to like brown or mud or black, depending on the kind of paint you're using. But if you're adding light colors in there, then obviously it's going to be more like a muddy color, like a grayish or a brown. Anyway, in physics, when all light colors of the spectrum come together, they make white. And when the shadow is basically absorbing, that part of the body is not, the light's not being reflected back into your eye. And so you see this very dark area. But as dark as that area might be, some light does reflect off the object back at you. And that little bit of light that reflects off you is usually of one or a couple wavelengths, meaning that when they mix together, they don't make pure white. They make an actual color. And that color is usually warm. So if you're using natural lighting, about 5000 K like the sun, and that's usually what they use like in photography, or maybe even slightly warmer than that, maybe a 4000 K lighting, then you're going to get your shadows are going to be warmer. So if you look in here, notice all the shadows are warm. Notice the color, all the shadows are warm. But if you take like the other photograph, for example, we can see here the shadows, although the color is warm, obviously they're very desaturated, and that's true because it's still a pure light. Now, if I were to use something like a light source that was more, notice even the light source here actually looks a little bit more on the blue side, but notice that some of it's also warm. So there's some blue up here, and that way the shadows here will be warm because that's more lighter in color. Some people teach, and I teach this too because it is a really good artistic thing, if you're using warm light that looks more warm, like more towards the warmer colors like yellow and orange, but it's obviously more toward the desaturation side of it. So say I pick a color like this and I put it more toward that desaturated side, more toward the white, it's still kind of it's a warm color. Now if I change this here to green or to a blue, that's a cooler light. Even though it looks still almost white, it's still a cool white and not a warm light. If you have cool light, typically they say that the shadows are going to be warmer. And if you have warm light, the shadows will be cooler. But you can see that it's not always the case. Here we have a light that is probably on the warmer side, I'd say probably around 4000 K. And you can see all the shadows are warmer. They're not very cool at all. Some of them start to head toward the cool side over here. That is, the purple here is still cool. And that's typically as cool as you're going to get with your shadows, is toward that purple. And there's nothing in here that's like that. But there are times where you will see that happen. And for artistic reasons, you could actually put some of that cool color in there. And I always recommend doing it. It adds a really nice look to things. And sometimes photographs and stuff will be modified. Now here's one obviously that's using a very, 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 very cool light, and therefore it's going to saturate the skin a lot. And as you get toward everything's going to be like that monochromatic. You're not going to get warm shadows in this case. But if you're using, like, let's say a 6000 K light, you might get some warmer shadows in there. Right, so let's go back to the explanation then of the shadows, just to make sure this makes sense. So where the shadows are, like in the hair here, for example, and notice that that's because of the color of the lighting being used, that the very few wavelengths that do escape from that shadow into your eye are only of a couple of bands of light, a couple of wavelengths of light. Therefore, they're going to appear as a color. And that means what? Saturation, right? Because they're not pure white. They're lacking all the other colors that would make it pure white. If what were to escape out of shadow were to be pure light, well, then one, you wouldn't have a dark shadow. Then you're going to get something that's less saturated, because all those waveforms are mixing together to make a pure white color, mixing in with the color of that is there, like midtones. Then you're going to get something that's like halfway between saturation and desaturation, like midtones typically are. Okay, so that's how the shadows work, and that's why shadows appear to be very, very dark. Or excuse me, very, very saturated, typically. But when you have like a photo like this here, you're going to have, and you also have light that's overlapping, almost like rays of light coming through. But if you go to a part that is not really affected by that so much, like down here, you have more saturated shadows. And especially if you get like a really dark shadow, like right here where it's not being affected much, notice that shadow is cool. And then if you have this really dark shadow right here, it's kind of zoom in on these pixels here. Right here you can see there's a really dark one. Notice that it's more cool. And there's more warm. But I'm just trying to get like pure. Notice that's more saturated. That's really saturated, very saturated. So you get a very saturated tone out of your shadows when they're really dark, because there is some light escaping, but the light escaping is going to be not pure color, but it's going to be of only a couple parts of the light. Now, before we actually do a quick painting demo, I'm going to talk about using weird lighting. So if you use like really bright light, whether it be CFLs or neon lighting or LEDs or something like that, that's on this side they're using this really bright blue light. And so when that hits the skin, what's reflecting back into your eyes is almost pure color. And so notice that even though the brightest part of the light, it's very saturated, because there's no white. You don't see any white here. What you see is a very bright. Now here you see some, but here you see a very bright blue color. It's a light blue color. And then over here on the yellow side, you would think the same thing would be true, and it kind of is, but it's not as saturated because it's not as strong of a light. And so if you notice here, it gets a lot more desaturated. As we move over to these midtones, in the green light, where the green and yellow light are mixing together, you're getting something that's saturated and desaturated depending on where you're at on the picture. Now, as we go towards the blue, like pure saturation, like everything, even the shadows, as you can see, everything's pretty much pure saturation, even down here, these dark shadows. But as you move toward where the two lights are mixing together, you're going to get less saturation. And this is because the two lights are opposite on the spectrum, so they're kind of neutralizing each other out. And then you're getting something that's, this green color is being made by using this really cool color and a really warm color. So it's kind of like orangish yellow, and then this very like cyan blue. And when they mix together on the body here, you get something that's less saturated because it's taken out. The complementary colors are kind of taking a lot of the light out and canceling each other out, and then making a color that is going to be less saturated. Over here you can see a lot of saturation because it's the more pure light. It's that pure orange color, and even up here in the dark reds. And so yeah, so basically just keep that in mind. That's you can see that that's true in real life. You can take a bunch of photos yourself in the sun to see that this is true. And this is also true even of clothing and everything else. You can put different objects and I recommend using the sun, because the sun is that pure light, and it's gonna be nice and bright and give you nice good shadows and stuff. And if you use certain angles and things away from the sun, you get nice dark shadows and nice bright highlights. Nice transition. Okay, so basically when you're painting, that's how you want to paint then. So now you know the physics of why it is, which I like knowing. I like knowing the whys of things. And once you know the whys of things, then it makes it that much easier to actually paint. So let's do a quick painting demonstration here. So we're going to start out and we'll do a flesh ball or something. We're going to do something in the middle. So we can either have it bright or we can have it dark. It depends. So we're going to do something right in the middle here. So it's not too saturated, it's not too desaturated. And it all depends on what is it you're going for, like the ultimate look you're going for. Now, if you're using Clip Paint Studio, or it used to be called Manga Studio, at the top here there's this little border thing. You can click that and it turns off the ants, but it's still selected. And I'm going to use a watercolor brush here. This is just the watercolor brush under watercolor brushes. I think it's default settings, except for I think it might actually be default settings. Anyway, now we're going to take and do the shadows first. So the shadows, we're going to kind of change the color tone a little bit toward more warm, or actually going toward the cool side of the spectrum actually. And we're going to pull this down. We'll make it very dark, not too saturated, and dark like that. Use a big brush here. And I'm just going to kind of put in, and actually I have to push kind of hard with this brush. That's not the brush I want to use then. I'm going to use this one, I think. I think this one allows me to... No, it also wants to blend in other colors. So instead I'm just going to use colored pencil. This will make it easier to just quickly put this down here. And I'm going to start blending the edge here. So far I haven't done any alting. This is all just pure color. Now, reflected light typically has a lot of saturation in it because it is pure color that's being reflected. So let's say blue, let's say there's like this is on top of a blue blanket or something like that. That blue is going to be reflected. Basically, the light is going to hit the blue, pick up that blue color, and then bounce off the blue blanket onto the ball here, and it's going to apply that blue color. And that blue color is going to be more true to color and therefore more saturated. It's not going to be too desaturated, but typically not as saturated as the actual shadow color. So I would go maybe back toward mid-tone, or maybe you can stay right around there. And let's just go with a very, very slight. I want it to be very light though. I don't want it to be too, just a little bit like that. That's all you need, just a little bit. I can go back to that color I was using. Doesn't have to be perfect. I'm going to add it a little bit darker now. And then right here we have this transition where it comes to the midtone. Right there is typically where you have a warmer color. And I'm going to go toward the midtone but make it warmer. Right, like that. That's where you have that, the transition from the shadow to the midtone is typically going to be warmer. And it's going to be more, not necessarily warmer, but more saturated is what I meant to say. All right, now we need to take that same color. We're going to go toward the warmer side here, more toward the yellow, and make that our light, and go more towards the desaturated end of the spectrum, more toward white. And we're going to add a highlight here, like that, and then we're going to kind of blend it off like so. Now this is you know, colored pencil, it's trying to simulate colored pencil, so it's very a lot of texture to it. And there you go. And then if you want, you can come and take your different colored, like transparent watercolor brush or something like that, and you can, you know, smooth some of this out and change it. I just wanted to show the basic principle there. And so where all this is hitting, now I take my color picker, you can see here is going to be a lot less, you know, very desaturated, less desaturated as it blends with the midtone. The midtone will be right in the center. This will be saturated because we're going toward that transition from the shadow, and the shadow is also going to be, they're going to be dark, but they're also going to be saturated. And there you have it. Now I'm going to take off the ants. I'm going to make a layer underneath this layer really fast. And we're just going to take this brush here. I'm just going to add some shadow. Like so. It's going to be darkest right there, and it's going to kind of go out as it get less dark as it goes out. Like that. Now in the shadow, I like to add a little bit of cooler color to it as well. It all depends on what, you know, if I have a warm light, I like to add just a little bit of cool color to my shadow. It does add it's just more artistic, I don't know. Like so, like that, and that just it also makes it look darker too when you add those two colors meshed together. And there you have it, and that's pretty much it. Now, like I said, some people, what they like to do is when they're working with a warmer light source is using a cooler shadow. You can do that. Back to the colored pencil here. Notice nothing really changes. Oops, on the wrong layer. It's going to be maybe more on the darker side. And then I'm going to add a little bit more warm in there too. You don't want it to be pure cool. You kind of mix them together like that. Now I'm going to take a cool color here. I'm just going to kind of add it as bounce light, reflective light in there. And that would be, of course, if the never do you want your reflected light. This is kind of going off the subject a little bit, but never do you want your reflected light to be brighter than your cast shadow. So you don't want to add like the same color brightness in there. So I want to bring that down. I just want a little bit in there just to show that's where it's coming from, as if the color that's underneath all this shadow is an actual bluish object, or like I said, I was going to have a blue rug there. But now I just have a little bit of blue inside this color instead of the other, instead of actually, and notice it's darker than here. But anyway, that's it. So that's the basic principles being applied. You can apply this to skin. And when you do, you'll notice that your skin will look a lot more natural and realistic. Just remember to shift the hues like I did. Don't just leave it all the same hue. You don't want to like stay like this. This is the same hue. You want to just leave it there, and you don't want to just go like, let's say here's your mid-tone. What you don't want to do is go like, let's say you make a ball here, filled in with that mid-tone color, and then don't change the hue at all and just go straight to the highlight here and go, okay, I'm going to add some highlight right here and kind of blend that out a little bit. And then I'm going to add the darker color and it's more saturated. You don't have to always go, oh, you just mess around with how much saturation, desaturation that you use. Back to that mid-tone just a little bit right here. Like that. And kind of, I don't want to go outside too much. Then it doesn't look quite as realistic, you see. But if you shift those hues just a little bit, like shift this more toward the red side of things, and you add that in as your shadow, and then you take your highlight and shift it more toward the warm, suddenly everything starts looking more realistic. And then you want to take that really more saturated warm color that runs right along the edge where it shifts over, and voila, you start to get, and then you add just a little bit of, like, let's say blue reflecting in there, or you can even just add a little bit of blue altogether in there, not too much. You can turn down the opacity or whatever of your brush, or just take a really, really light brush stroke and just add a little bit of blue into the shadow. And now it looks far more realistic than it did before. Right, so that's it. So don't always, remember, a color picker in a photo doesn't always pick up what's truly there, the naked eye. If you look at, like, do life, paint from life rather than a photo. Because if you look at a person in the sunlight, let's say a nude or under natural lighting inside of an art studio, and you go like do painting nude figures, a nude painting class where they have a live model in front of you, you'll notice that the shadows are never going to be as warm as the skin itself. By warm means it's always going to shift toward the cooler side of things. What I mean by that is it might still be warm to you, but it's going to shift towards the cool. It's not going to be like blue. So it'd be more like this. It'd be like, let's say you have your mid-tone here, which is something like this here. Let's say that's kind of like your skin tone. You have your mid-tone in here. And then you have your highlight, which would be a little more on the warmer side. Now I'm just shifting a little bit more toward the warmer side here as I add in my highlight here. Like so. And then I need to add shadow. I'm going to shift it to the opposite side, going more toward the cool side of the spectrum, but I'm not going to go way to the cool side. Now if you want to be kind of artistic, you can, that's up to you. But let's just go with something like that. And then that's going to be my shadow. I might just have it just a little bit more saturated than, and this right here will be my shadow, like so. And then I want to have that warmer color right where the transition is, and like that. Now you get a more natural skin tone by doing that. And notice I didn't go too far. Now I didn't have to go this far with it, so you could have, let's go take a couple steps back to show the difference. Go back to your mid-tone, take your color picker or hold the Alt key to do it. I'm just going to use the color picker for now because it's just easier for how I'm working right now. I'm going to kind of just blend this out just a little bit here. And then I'm going to take, on my color picker, I'm going to take the mid-tone again. And I'm just going to move it to the left a little bit on the color picker, going toward the cool side, not toward the warm side, so toward the purple side. Just a little bit. I don't have to shift it much, just a little bit like that. Now I'm going to shift it down here to the saturated side. And then bam. Now we get a less muddy look. And then we're going to come here and take that saturated color and run it right here along the edge, because that's where you get that warmest part. Now you have something here that looks less muddy, looks more natural to skin tone. But you can also change all this too by just continuing to work it. So go back to that warmer side, just add a little bit more brightness here. And then you can take the cool side and just add just a little bit of cool, as if it's being reflected into the skin. And you start getting even less that muddy look, and so that's how you get that more realistic skin tone. So yeah, try that out, see how it works out for you, and hopefully this has helped you learn something about when and why to use saturation versus non-saturation. And again, remember that one model I showed you here, she was mostly all desaturated. Everything, almost everything here is on more on the desaturated side. And so if you wanted to, if you can actually just color pick and use those colors and actually get something that's going to look more realistic than if you were to, let's go ahead and pick, let's say, the mid-tone here, for example. And then we'll pick this kind of shadowy color. But I'm just going to prove that even if you were to take, and let's go take the highlight here, it's still going to look kind of muddy. Right, so even though all that's blended together, it still looks a little bit muddy, like not totally natural. It's because you're just color picking. You're not getting a true sense of what colors are there. And that's why it helps to know color theory. And so I know that, hey, my lights are more, I'm going to take a shadow color. I'm going to grab that shadow color. I'm going to go more toward the warmer side here and then a little bit more saturated. And add some of that in there as well. And then I'm going to take a little bit more of that blue. And I just want to add a little bit in there, not much. And then all inside of here, I want to add some warm color. And one easy way to do that is just take a kind of warm color and then take your airbrush. And then I like to set it to soft light. And then just hit it really lightly. And just add some of that warm tone to it. And then you come in, you can paint some of those colors in and out by using your, and now you have a less muddy color. Now it doesn't quite look, the same as here, but now watch what happens when I take these colors. There's so many different subtle colors here, but if we just take the mid-tone here and we just paint that mid-tone all one color. When we take this color and paint it all, we take the shadow, we paint it like that, take this color and we just paint it like this. We're just color picking and we're just straight painting that pure color that we see. Already you can see that it doesn't look as real as it did a second ago. And that's because the colors are pretty true, but there's so many other colors that are in there that we're not seeing. Let's take the part of the color picker right here. Look how this little the hue shifter, how it shifts around as I move around here. There's a lot of different variations of colors in there. It's not just one color. Over here by the leg, look how it shifts around a lot. It's not much, but each of those little shifts add and changes. So it's trying to, now look at it, gets really cool. And this light right here is all really cool. Cool colors back into warm. See that transition? So even though you might not be able to see all those cool colors in there, they're in there. And that's where you got to know that, okay, this is using more cool lighting and allowing, or the filtered light is allowing more cool colors instead of more natural colors to come through. And so you have to add those cool colors into your scheme. So, all right, anyway. So the basic rule with colors then is if you're using a cooler color for your highlight color, then use a warmer color for your shadows. And if you're using a warmer color for your highlight, use a cooler color for your shadows. That is, just go a little bit more toward the cooler side of things, like going toward the purple. You don't have to use blue or purple in your shadow, but you can use a little bit. And that's it. Hopefully you guys learned something. If you did, please do me a favor. Like, share, subscribe, and sharing is awesome. Leave a comment if you have any questions. And then, yeah, just definitely share it, because if you got something out of it, I'm sure somebody else will also get something out of it. So share it on your favorite social networks. I'd appreciate it. Thank you for watching. Again, the link to my website is in the description of this video, which is neil@masterpaintingnow.com. And for those that don't know who I am the best-selling author of How to Draw Awesome Figures on Amazon, and also one of the top art instructors on Udemy. And my Udemy courses are on my site, and they're usually on sale. That's the best place to get them. So if you do get one of my courses, try to go to my site to get it, because you'll get it on sale rather than going straight to Udemy. And again, that's masterpaintingnow.com, and the link is in the description. All right, until next time.